Hey, it's Aaron. We're on this beautiful grandmother-style couch. We're talking tactics. Let's get into it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the war with Iran. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think could happen, and then I'm going to talk about what we can personally do in this situation, how we can use it to our advantage in some way. And without any further ado, let's get into it. Now, the first way that I think that Iran could handle this situation is indirectly. And a lot of people, a lot of experts have talked about how this could be the way that things go about for at least a little while. And that basically is Iran will retaliate against the United States for bombing and killing one of their top generals by doing attacks on either infrastructure or facilities, such as oil facilities, tankers, refineries, that sort of thing. Or they could also attack allies of the United States. So they could attack another country that's down there, possibly the United Arab Emirates, possibly Israel, who knows? But instead of directly launching missiles at the United States, they could attack one of the allies that they have down there, or they could hit some infrastructure like one of the oil tankers. And since Donald Trump has specifically said they're there for the oil, they want to get the oil, they made sure they secured the oil, there's plenty of oil, obviously hitting them in the oil would be the most logical step for Iran to do. Now, that's not going to hurt Iran very much, destroying some of the oil that's coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, because it just so happens, coincidentally, that Iran just discovered another oil field within their territory that should increase their production something like 3% a day or some radical number. So there's that. But that is basically the indirect way that Iran could attack the United States, or at least attack some of their proxies within the area. Now, if you look at a map of Iran, and you look at a map showing all of the military bases the United States has, you'll clearly see that Iran is right in the middle of all of their military bases. And that's for good reason, because the United States really wants to keep an eye on Iran as closely as they possibly can. So they have military bases just a few kilometers, few hundred kilometers outside of their direct borders, all around the entirety of Iran. But Iran happens to have a bit of a strategic advantage when it comes to just their landmass. It turns out that a lot of their landmass, a lot of their topography is plateaus. So when there are open spaces, there aren't a lot of populated areas there, and the United States or any military that wants to come in is going to have to go in through specific areas which can be easily defended. Now, one thing that I want to stress to anybody that is tactically minded out there, or anybody that has an interest in any of this at all, is to definitely check out and read Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Now, it's not a long book. You can get, you know what? Fuck it. I'll leave a link in the description box below to an audiobook version of it. It takes about an hour and a half to read, and I strongly encourage everybody out there to read this so they can get a good feeling or a good understanding of how military tactics should look. So, like I said, check that out. That's basically how the topography of the area looks, and how it is a strategic advantage for the Iranians just having their landmass like that. But the other way that Iran could retaliate against the United States is through some sort of direct conflict. And they can do this because they are an actual country, and they have an actual full military. I think that the military that they have now is several times the size of the military that Iraq had back when the United States invaded Iraq 100 years ago, or just a couple of decades ago, starting the war on terror. That's terrifying because they are able to hold themselves very well in a battle. And if it's going to be a direct battle or an indirect battle, they're still going to be able to hold themselves very well. Now, it's unlikely going by Sun Tzu's The Art of War, that Iran would directly attack the United States. More likely is they would attack something and move the United States' defenses to a different area so they could, maybe sneak around the back or hit them from behind or something like that. That's probably how things would go. If Iran was able to use the United States to attack a certain area that was beneficial to Iran, then they would definitely do that and make sure that the United States is expending as much military finances as they possibly can, because when you're a smaller army facing a larger army, you want to be as big of a burden as you possibly can on that larger army, and kind of just misdirect them and send them around and everything like that. So that is just Iran by itself, but we have to take into consideration that Iran is also, like I was saying the other day, best of buds with Russia and China. Now, Russia, well, you know what? We'll start with China. China has 2 million soldiers on reserve. 2 million. That's a motherfuckload. That's a lot more than the United States has, though the United States does have a lot more money invested in their military because they have more advanced equipment. But remember, more advanced equipment doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win a war. If you want an example of that, just look at Vietnam. The United States had an overwhelming superiority of equipment and still couldn't defeat the guerrillas that were fighting against them in Vietnam. So obviously the amount of technology you have doesn't necessarily equate to a win, though the amount of people you have doesn't necessarily equate to a win either. Interestingly, Russia also, who would be involved in an Iranian conflict, if it escalates to that point, just recently created a missile system that is, quote, undefeatable, according to experts all across the board. And the United States, even with its military superiority, would need, I think it is a decade or something like that, to actually build the equipment necessary to counteract this, quote, undefeatable missile system that Russia has developed. So that doesn't look good for anybody. That definitely doesn't look good for the United States. And this is turning out to be a very scary quagmire, to be completely honest. And if you're not scared, then you're lying. But being scared isn't going to help anything. The one thing that will is being prepared. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, what can we do about this? Well, the main thing that we can do is definitely getting out, getting active, getting organized, and trying to talk to people in real life. Now, community outreach and education is obviously something that we're going to need to do big time, and we're going to have to gear that gear us towards educating people in the system on socialism, on anarchism, on Marxism, on all of those things as much as we possibly can. Spreading class consciousness right now is extremely important. We don't have the time to fuck around. So talking to everybody that you can to spread that Marxism, to spread that class consciousness is extremely important. But that isn't going to save anybody right now because it takes time to learn things. So the other thing that needs to happen is more organizing, more demonstrations, and when people have organized, when there are demonstrations, making sure that we are out there talking to people and bread pilling those motherfuckers as much as we possibly can. You want to make sure that you are convincing, that you are changing people's minds, moving them leftward, so we can get away from not only these wars, but the capitalistic system and the state structure that created them in the first place. That's where we need to be. We need to be doing that now more than ever. The other thing that we need to be doing is formulating, I'm going to say, community defense groups. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody that they should do that, but I am going to say that in the past, here we go again, I'm not going to condemn nor condone any of the things I'm about to talk about, but in the past, community defense organizations all throughout the entire world have worked to make sure that people are safe within their community, because a lot of the time, relying on state structures to take care of you when they are at war, especially a world war, that might not be the best case scenario. There are a lot of places and a lot of times when the state has used that war to justify even more atrocities specifically committed on their own people. And you can see that with just the Patriot Act, for fuck's sakes. But you can see it all across the board. Specifically, 1940s Germany did a lot of that kind of thing. So relying on state structures to make us safe isn't going to be a great idea. Things could very well and may possibly get a lot worse for a lot of people, specifically marginalized people. And the axiom that we have to consider is that we keep us safe, right? And that happens to be the slogan of the Socialist Rifle Association, an organization that definitely should, in most approximations, see a larger number of people entering into them because it might very well be a good way for a lot of people to get training on how firearms work and on how they can better go about defending their communities however they see fit. Now, like I said, I do not condemn nor condone anybody going out and joining the Socialist Rifle Association, and I'm not going to, on YouTube, endorse such things, but it might be something that you might be interested in reading a little bit more about. Now, the thing that I was talking about a little bit ago, and I'm going to go back to quoting Sun Tzu, is the idea that if your enemy is divided into many different positions, it makes it really hard for that enemy to defend any single one of those positions. Now, this is important because if the enemy is spread out over a large area, any weak point is going to be that much weaker. And if you're a smaller force that's fighting against a larger force, then finding those weak points is your best strategy, and you should only be focusing on attacking those weak points. And something to think about is if your enemy is protecting their left, they're not going to be protecting their right. If your enemy is protecting their front, they're not going to be protecting their rear. And if your enemy is spread out all across the board, protecting many different places all at once, then they're not going to be able to defend against all sorts of things, and everywhere becomes a weak point. And that's doubly true if your enemy happens to be a large state structure that is dealing with not only protests all across their entire country when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the financial crisis, when it comes to whatever it is, not having enough jobs, going to war, and then also having to fight a real live full-blown war across the sea. That state is going to be spreading itself really quite thin, so there is going to be a lot of weak places. At least that's the way I look at it. If you do get a chance, please check out my Patreon. Every dollar does help fund this show, and if you want to know more about tactics, come back to this channel because I'm full of tactics. Keep watching.